Oh, hello everyone. This is a recording of a presentation that I gave at Who Do You Think You Are Live this year. Unfortunately, there were a few technical problems on the day when I gave my talk, and the recording that was done could not be used. So you now have a completely brand new recording, and the advantage of this is that you will not have the buzz of the crowd who are walking past the lecture area. There is a handout for this talk which you can find on the link below. I will put that link also on the YouTube channel so that you can just click through directly to find that. So in this talk I will be looking at the three main types of DNA tests that you can take for your genealogy research. The first test that we'll be looking at is the Y-chromosome DNA test, and this is the test that follows the surname line. And this test can be used for your genealogy research, but also for your deep ancestry. It will take you back about 200 to 300,000 years. The second test is the mitochondrial DNA test, and this follows the direct female line. This again can be used for genealogy research, but will also take you back hundreds and thousands of years into your deep ancestry. And the third test that we'll look at is the autosomal DNA test, and this will put you into a matching database and give you matches with your genetic cousins on all your different family lines. This test doesn't have such a far reach as the other two tests and is most effective within about the last 5 or 6 generations, so that's roughly about 200 years. Now, for genealogy research, there are a number of reasons why you might want to use DNA testing. First of all, you can use it to help to verify your family trees. It's very useful if you've got a particular hypothesis that you want to test. You may want to investigate whether or not two men with the same surname share a common ancestor, or you may want to investigate whether two people, say, share the same great-grandfather or great-grandmother. It's a question of choosing the appropriate test for the particular scenario that you want to investigate. DNA testing can sometimes help where you don't have paper records, and it can sometimes provide answers that you cannot get from the paper records alone. So there are cases where it can help with brick walls. So for example, if you've got an illegitimacy in your family tree, or if you're adopted, sometimes DNA testing can give you clues and can even sometimes provide matches with the biological surname or with living relatives if you're an adoptee. You can use DNA testing within a surname project to look at the evolution and origins of surnames. It can be fun just to take a DNA test, to go into the databases and just to find out who you match and to get to know your genetic cousins. You can also get admixture percentages from the autosomal DNA tests, your percentage of Asian, African or European DNA. And the Y-DNA and mitochondrial DNA tests can provide insight into your deep ancestry going back for thousands and thousands of years. Now, DNA testing does not replace your documentary research. You need to think of DNA as just another type of record that you use with your research, and we normally use all the records together before we come to any conclusions about relationships or placement on the family tree. And unlike the paper records, DNA does not give you the names of your ancestors, and it also does not identify precise relationships or give you exact dates. It's all worked out on probabilities. You'll be given a range of possible relationships or a range of dates, and then it's up to you to work with your matches, with the people that you match, and to compare family trees and try and work out how you're related to each other. One important caveat about DNA testing: it can sometimes throw up surprises. So if you don't want to know the answer, don't ask the question. Sometimes people do not get the answer that they were expecting, and sometimes it can produce surprises. So we do sometimes have fathers and sons testing and finding out that they are not father and son. We do have people testing who discover very close relatives that they didn't know that they had, like half siblings, and sometimes the DNA can disprove all your careful genealogical research, and you may find out that that your surname is not the surname that you actually thought it was. But fortunately those incidences are rare, and I think if you are a genealogist you will want to know the answer to the question. But just a word of caution there. So the first test that we're going to look at in more detail is the Y-chromosome DNA test. And we have, if you're a male, you will have an X chromosome and a Y chromosome. These are what are known as the sex chromosomes. And if you're a female, you will have 2 X chromosomes. So as you can see, the important feature about the Y chromosome is that only males have a Y chromosome. So only males can take this test, but females obviously can recruit their male relatives, and hopefully everyone will have a brother, a father, or at least a male cousin or an uncle who can take the test on their behalf. We normally coordinate Y-DNA tests within surname projects. There is now only one company, Family Tree DNA in America, that we can realistically use for Y-DNA testing. They have the largest database of Y-chromosome DNA results, with over 500,000 results in their database, and they also host all the surname projects. So for all the common surnames now, there is a surname project, and there are also projects for all sorts of other different surnames. So it's worth having a look to see if your surname is represented in a project. If it's not represented in a project, then there's always a possibility of starting up your own project to investigate a surname. And all the projects are run by volunteers. They do it in their own free time. So how does the Y-DNA test work? The Y chromosome is passed on virtually unchanged from father to son. But then every now and then you get little mistakes creeping in when the chromosome is passed on from the father to the son. And these mistakes are known as mutations. They're like little typos. And the Y-DNA test looks at particular locations or markers on the Y chromosome where these mistakes are most likely to occur. The technical name for these are STRs, or short tandem repeats. And then for each marker that's tested you get a number, and then your numbers just go into a database. So it's really like a sort of number matching game. When you get your DNA results, what you get is this string of numbers like this, and the technical name for this string of numbers is a haplotype. Now, one DNA test result on its own is actually pretty meaningless. The whole value of the test is in the comparison process, and in simple terms, the more matching markers that you have with someone else, then the closer the relationship. And then if there are too many mismatching markers, then you know that there is no common ancestor in a genealogical time frame on that all-male line. This is what a set of DNA results looks like. These are 5 results from my Cruse surname project. And the top 4 results there, you can see that all the numbers match up very nicely. The first 2 results, every single number is identical, so that's a very, very close match. In the 3rd and 4th columns, we've just got 2 differences that have crept in, but that's enough within the confines of a surname project to be confident that they all share a common ancestor. You're allowed just a few minor mismatches like that. And sometimes when you do have matches that occur like this, where you do have 1 or 2 mutations, they can be very useful, and they can sometimes identify particular branches of the surname. And in this case I've got one branch in Devon that had 1 number, and then another branch that went off to Canada that had the other number on this particular marker. The 5th person in this set of results, you can see that on virtually every marker the results were different. So in that particular case, even though it was the same surname and from the same part of Devon, we can say that he does not share a common ancestor with the other 4 men in the project on that male line. only showed a small number of markers on there because that was all I could fit on the slide, but there are in fact tests at different numbers of markers. When the test first became available, you could only order a 12 marker DNA test, but if you only have 12 markers, you end up with sometimes hundreds and thousands of matches, and most of those will not be of any significance. So now the standard entry-level test is a 37 marker test, but you can also order tests at 67 markers and also at 111 markers. You can always upgrade and order extra markers at a later date, and it doesn't actually cost any more to do the testing in that way. 67 markers is normally useful if you're trying to find matches with other surnames. It's more difficult interpreting the results when you're finding matches with other surnames, and also it's more useful if you're looking at matches that go back pre-1600. And there are some cases where people have large numbers of matches even at 67 markers, and then they really need to go up to 111 markers. And 111 markers is also useful if you're interested in investigating your deep ancestry. And when you get your results, you will get this page on the Family Tree DNA website, and you've got lots of different menus that you can navigate and various help menus that you can look at. But the most important feature on this page is the bit where it says matches, and we will just take a look at that now. It's actually my dad's match page, and on here his surname is actually Cruse, C-R-U-W-I-S, and you can see here that he has matches with 3 other men with the surname Cruse, and if you're lucky, people will also have given information about their most distant known ancestor on their male line. And you can see on the left it says steps, and that indicates the number of mismatching markers. So in the first 2 cases there's just 1 mismatching marker, and then with the others there are 3 mismatching markers and 4 mismatching markers. So the more markers that match, normally the closer the relationship. And it is quite common to have matches with a variety of different surnames. Even if you have a very good tree going back for several hundred years, there's always the possibility that someone else has what we call a non-paternal event in their line. And some of these matches, the more distant matches, will in any case predate surnames. Each surname project will normally have a public page, a public website, and the important part of the public website is the page where they display the DNA results. This is the results page for my Cruwys DNA project, and within a surname project we group people in what we call genetic families. So here you can see I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different groups, and within each group the people are in that group purely based on the fact that their Y chromosome results match. And if you look closely at the first group there, group 1, you can see that the people have a number of different spellings of the Cruse surname, and they have ancestry from a number of different places. Some are from Devon, some from Canada, one from Cornwall, and one from Ireland, and some from America. And we also have there someone with a different surname, and in this particular case this person had been sitting in the database and didn't match any of the people with the Rainey surname, and then when one of my Cruses tested, he had a very, very close match with one of my Cruses in America. And when they looked at their family trees, it turned out that the Cruses and Raineys were living side by side each other in South Carolina there. So we think that in that particular case there is one of these NPEs, non-paternity events, or not the parent expected, as we sometimes say. Sometimes DNA can help you to break through brick walls, and also it can help to refine the focus of your research. This is a particular example from my own Cruse surname project. One of my researchers was trying to investigate his ancestor Harry Cruse, and the family stories told him that Harry was a shipwreck survivor, and apparently he was the only survivor of the shipwreck, and he managed to swim ashore, and once he'd settled in South Africa, he remained in South Africa for the rest of his life, and the bay where he swam to shore was actually named Harry's Bay in his honour. But trying to do the genealogical research on this line proved very, very difficult. We had a death notice from South Africa, and this gave us the name of the parents of the deceased, but it only gave us the name of the mother, Mary Cruse. It gave the age of the deceased, which was 36 years, so that gave us an approximate date of birth of about 1826. But the birthplace was given as Great Britain. So we were then looking for someone by the name of Henry Cruse, born about 1826, somewhere in England, Scotland or Wales. And with no overall index of parish registers, that is not an easy task. And this research was actually one of the first people who joined my DNA project when I first set it up. And he initially sat in the database for about the first year without having any matches at all. And then gradually the matches started to come in and we started to get some answers. And this is what we found. He now has 4 matches, all with people with the surname Cruse, and 3 of those matches have very detailed family trees, and they all trace back to a little village called Ogbourne St George in Wiltshire. And the 4th match has a tree that goes back to Berkshire, and in fact we were then able to connect that Berkshire tree with the Wiltshire tree. So now, purely based on the DNA, we have a very strong clue as to where Henry Cruse came from. We're now going back to the paper records trying to find the connection. It looks as though the line probably goes through London, which complicates the matter a little bit more, but we now have a particular focus for the research, and we hope that eventually we will get the complete answer. The other part of the Y-DNA test is the haplogroup, and this is something that you'll see on your results page. If you are English, 70% roughly of English men will belong to haplogroup R1b, but there are a variety of other different haplogroups that we do normally see in English men. Now, the thing about haplogroups is that they all tend to have their own unique distribution patterns, and you will find some haplogroups are more prevalent in certain parts of the world than others. So this can also be a useful tool sometimes for genealogical research, but this is really more of interest if you want to explore your deep ancestry. So on this rather simplified map here, you can see that haplogroup Q, for example, is the haplogroup that's normally found in Native Americans. In Australian Aborigines, the common haplogroup there is haplogroup C4. In Africa, it's normally haplogroup A, haplogroup B, and particular sub-branches of haplogroup E that we normally find. And sometimes just having a haplogroup can be informative in itself. You will find some people will have haplogroup H, and if you have a haplogroup H, that's a haplogroup that's normally found in India. And the reason for finding haplogroup H in a British person would be that they have Romany Gypsy ancestry. So the haplogroups in themselves can sometimes throw up unexpected surprises. The haplogroups all fit together on one big tree, and then all those different branches of that tree eventually coalesce at one point way back in time, and that coalescent point is the most recent common ancestor of all males on the planet today. And we sometimes call that most recent common ancestor Y-chromosomal Adam. And that coalescent point dates back to roughly about 254,000 years ago, according to one of the recent papers that was published a few months ago. If you are interested in deep ancestry and haplogroups, then it's a good idea to join the relevant haplogroup project for your particular surname. You'll find a list of haplogroup projects in the ISOGG Wiki. This is the U106 project, which my dad belongs to. That's one of the sub-branches of R1b. And if this is something that is of interest, then it's actually a very exciting area of discovery at the moment. And there's all sorts of different tests that you can go on to take to find out which sub-branches of your haplogroup you belong to. and those sub-branches are now starting to reach right down into genealogical time. But those tests are quite expensive and quite advanced at the moment. Right, the second test that we're going to be looking at is the mitochondrial DNA test. Now, mitochondrial DNA is passed on by a mother to both her male and female children. So both males and females can take this test. And this test traces the direct maternal line. So that's your mother, your mother's mother, your mother's mother, mother's mother, and so on back in time. It's less useful as a genealogical tool. One of the obvious limitations is that the surname changes with every generation, but also it has a fairly low mutation rate. So what that means is it can confirm that two people are related, but usually within a very wide time scale. However, it can be very useful for ancient DNA, and when you read in newspapers stories about ancient DNA testing, then it's usually mitochondrial DNA that they're using, and that's because there are lots and lots of mitochondria in every cell. So if they are able to extract any ancient DNA, it's usually the mitochondrial DNA that they will do first. People always get confused about the inheritance path of mitochondrial DNA. So I've just put this chart here. So it follows just this one bottom line of your family tree. It doesn't trace every single ancestor on your mother's side of the family tree, just the one very specific line. It's like the mirror image of the surname line. Mitochondrial DNA is a circular molecule, and there are two different tests that you can take. Again, Family Tree DNA are the only company that you can choose for genealogical purposes, because they're the only company that have a matching database for mitochondrial DNA. The first test is what's known as the mtDNA plus test, and that tests 10% of your mitochondrial genome, and that's this little bit called the control region at the top there. And the other test that you can have is what's known as the full mitochondrial sequence test, and that sequence is literally the whole mitochondrial genome, 100% of the genome. That test 5 years ago was really expensive. It would have cost you something like $500 or more, but it's really dropped down in price in the last few years, and it's now around about £134. It's oft, if you buy it in a sale, it was on sale at Who Do You Think You Are Live, and it was about £100 in the sale. So if you wanted to do a mitochondrial DNA test, the full mitochondrial sequence test is the only mitochondrial DNA test that you would ever need. And if that's something you want to do, I would probably recommend now going for the full sequence, because if you take just the very basic test, you can end up with lots and lots of matches, and they're not really very meaningful. When you get your mitochondrial DNA results, you will get a list of your matches in the Family Tree DNA database. These are actually my husband's matches. And again, you will be, if you're lucky, the people you match will have given the names of their most distant known ancestors. And you will also get the genetic distance, so that shows you how many markers you mismatch on in the mitochondrial DNA. With mitochondrial DNA, we're really looking for exact matches because of the slow mutation rate. One of the downsides, as I mentioned, is that the matches can be very distant. So my husband here has ancestry from Cambridgeshire, going back to the 1700s, and he has exact matches with some people in America, and they all trace their maternal line back to a small village in Germany. So it's obviously a very deep connection there, perhaps something to do with the Anglo-Saxon migrations or something. This page on the Family Tree DNA website gives you the chances of the time frame for the mitochondrial DNA matches. And if you can see here, if you have a full sequence match, they reckon that 95% of the time that match will fall within about 22 generations, or about 550 years. So that's still quite a long time ago when you've got that problem of the surname changing every generation. And that also means that 5% of the time the match will fall outside that time frame, and those matches can sometimes go back a very long way. If you only do the basic mtDNA plus test, then only about 50% of those matches will fall within about the last 700 years. So that's not really very meaningful for genealogical research purposes. One excellent example of a practical use of mitochondrial DNA testing was the case of Richard III, which I'm sure you've all read about, and we had a fascinating talk from Turi King at Who Do You Think You Are Live about the identification of Richard III. If you get a chance, it's well worth reading the paper where they've also got details of all the genealogical research that was done. Very few people, I would imagine, can do what was done in this particular case and trace two all-female lines all the way back to the 1400s. And in fact, in this case, they had to do reverse genealogy and trace those lines forward in time to try and find living relatives. But the important point about the Richard III paper was that it wasn't the mitochondrial DNA alone that proved the identity of Richard III. As always, DNA is just one particular type of record that we use in combination with all the other records to draw a conclusion. So the mitochondrial DNA supported the identification of Richard III, but it was actually some of the other factors that were more important in the identification. And as you were probably aware, the Y-DNA was actually in contradiction of the evidence, and there'd obviously been an NPE in the male line there. With mitochondrial DNA, you will also get haplogroups, and just to confuse you, the haplogroups have no relation to the naming system used for the Y-DNA haplogroups, but these haplogroups again have unique distribution patterns, and you will find certain haplogroups are more prevalent in particular parts of the world than others. So if you were an American and you had Native American ancestry, then you would expect to belong to haplogroup A, B, C or D, and there are also some branches of haplogroup X that are seen in Native Americans. If you were an African, you would expect to have one of the L haplogroups. And within Europe, we've got haplogroup H, which is the predominant haplogroup. That's seen in about 40% of Europeans. And then we have a number of other different haplogroups that we will also find in Europe. And again, with mitochondrial DNA, sometimes the haplogroup on its own can provide clues about your ancestry that you may not be able to get from the paper record. If you take a mitochondrial DNA test and you discover, for example, that you are haplogroup M, haplogroup M is normally found in India, so that could be an indication that you have an ancestor who was perhaps out in British India and married a local Indian woman. With mitochondrial DNA, we also can build a mitochondrial DNA tree. This is actually just a small part of it. Each of those branches at the bottom will open out and produce a much, much bigger tree. But again, this mitochondrial DNA tree, all those branches eventually coalesce until we get to a point where we have the most recent common ancestor of every single person on the planet today on that all-female line. And that person is sometimes known as mitochondrial Eve, and the date for the most recent common ancestor is round about 200,000 years ago, plus or minus several thousand years. With mitochondrial DNA, there are also haplogroup projects that you can join, and if you are interested in your haplogroup, it's a good idea to join the relevant haplogroup project. You'll find a list of the mitochondrial DNA haplogroup projects in the ISOGG Wiki. This is the Haplogroup U4 project that I run. The advantage of being in the haplogroup project is that you can see the other people who are in your particular subclade, and you can look at the distribution of your particular subclade and see which other countries it's found in. If you just do the basic mtDNA plus test, you will just get a very simple haplogroup assignment. So you will just be told that you are, say, a U4 or a haplogroup U. If you do the full sequence test, then you get a much more detailed haplogroup assignment like U4A1B. And quite often, in fact, you get lots of extra letters and numbers in addition to the 4 that I've shown there. One word of caution about haplogroups: you will sometimes see stories in newspapers where people are claiming that they're descended from the Queen of Sheba, or everyone's related to Napoleon, or people are descended from kings and warlords. Most of these stories tend to be planted as publicity stunts, and particularly by one British company in particular. But there is very little in the way of science in these stories that have been published in the press, and some of the stories are so ludicrous that the term genetic astrology has been coined to describe them. So do watch out for some of these stories that you will see. I've got a website that we've set up at UCL where we have tried to explain why some of these silly stories are unscientific. So if you have any doubts about some of the more ludicrous stories that appear in the press, then do have a look at our website and you will find the reasons why those stories are not to be believed. But fortunately that's only a very minor part of DNA testing, and it's just a shame that the newspapers never seem to focus on all the wonderful success stories that we have from coming out of genetic genealogy, and focus on all the silly stuff instead. Just a quick word about family tree DNA for both Y-DNA and mitochondrial DNA. They are really the only company that we can effectively use for genealogical purposes. Family Tree DNA have a wonderful international database. They sell their test kits all over the world, and they have a massive Y-DNA database, over 500,000 people in that Y-DNA database, and over 200,000 people in their mitochondrial DNA database, and those are both the largest databases of their kind in the world. They offer a full range of tests. They're the only company that actually offer the full mitochondrial DNA sequence test, and the only company to offer a 111 marker test. They also have a partnership with something called the Genealogist Project, and this is a deep ancestry project which has now attracted over 700,000 people from 140 different countries in the world. But the people who have tested with that project, they can transfer their results to Family Tree DNA, and that has also brought in lots of international participants in the Family Tree DNA database. So if you're looking to find matches with people in different European countries, if you've got ancestors from, say, Poland or Russia, you will find Polish people, Russian people, Norwegian people, Swedish people in the Family Tree DNA database. If you're lucky, you may find that you can get a free Y-DNA test. There is a page in the ISOGG Wiki where all these offers are collated, so do have a look at that page and see if you can find your surname on the list. These tests are sponsored by Surnames Projects. Often it's an American project where they're trying to find matches with people in the UK, and you usually have to provide something like 4 generations of a pedigree, just so that you can qualify for the offer. Okay, so I'm going to now move on to the final test, which is the Autosomal DNA test, and this is a test which is suitable for both males and females. And we receive autosomal DNA from all our ancestors, and this test works on the principle of matching segments of DNA, and the larger the segment, the closer your relationship with your match. This test will put you in a database and give you matches with your genetic cousins who share a common ancestor with you within about the last 5 or 6 generations. It does give you more distant matches than that, but effectively it's the more recent matches that you need to work with, because that's where you stand the most chance of finding the genealogical relationship. The difficulty with this test is that the matches could be on any one of your different family lines. It's always best to test the oldest living relatives first, and that actually gives you the advantage of going back that one extra generation. And with this test, it also helps to test other close relatives. So if you've got, say, first or second cousins that you can test, or test your parents if you can. If you don't have parents, you can test your siblings. So the more people that you test, the better representation you get across all your ancestry. And testing those second cousins, third cousins is also helpful for the purposes of elimination and also for confirmation, so that if you match, say, a third cousin, and that third cousin also matches someone else in your matches, then you know which line that matches on. The databases still have a long way to go for autosomal DNA to reach critical mass for people of British ancestry. So at the moment, these tests are really best used if you've got a particular hypothesis to test. But you can also, if you want, just take a test to go on what we call a fishing trip, just to see who you're going to match. And as the databases grow, that sort of approach is going to be more and more successful. We have a slightly more complicated situation with autosomal DNA, and there is a choice of 3 different testing companies. The first testing company to come up with a cousin matching test was 23andMe. Their main focus is actually on health, and their test was originally a health test. They had to suspend the health reports in America, but we can now get the health reports in the UK and also in Canada. But because of the health focus, what you find in the 23andMe database is that a lot of people have taken that test for health purposes, but then aren't really interested in communicating about genealogy. They sell their test in 56 different countries. They have a massive database of about 900,000 people, but about 90% of the database is in the US. And then when you take out all the people who've only tested for health reasons, it does reduce the pool of potential matches. Family Tree DNA were the next company to offer a cousin finding test, and they introduced their test back in February 2010. They have the advantage of having the cheapest price for an autosomal DNA test. Their test is about half as expensive as the other 2 tests. It comes in at about £72 in total, versus £125 for 23andMe and £119 for Ancestry DNA. So if you wanted to, say, test a particular hypothesis, then obviously Family Tree DNA is going to be the company of choice, because it will cost you half as much. But if you are looking for matches to solve particular mysteries, and you're hoping to get the match to solve the problem, then you really need to be in all 3 databases if possible, and the databases will eventually grow over time. In Family Tree DNA, they don't actually announce the actual size of their database. We estimate it's probably about 150,000. That may be quite an underestimate, but they do have the advantage of having a worldwide database. They sell their test in all 200 or so countries of the world, and they have a much bigger proportion of non-US people in their database. It's only about 70% US. And they've got people from all over the world, from lots of different European countries. So depending on the focus of your test, then they are often the best choice if you're not American. Ancestry DNA launched their autosomal DNA test in May 2012, but they only launched it in the US, and they only started to make their test available in the UK in January of this year. So they started off at the beginning of this year with a database of around about 800,000 Americans. So if you do test with Ancestry, what you will find is you end up with lots and lots of matches with Americans, but not so many British people. That will change as more and more people do test with Ancestry, but of course it is more expensive to test with them, and I'm wondering how much that is going to deter people from testing. And also the fact that you've only got a very restricted number of countries where the test is sold. They are supposed to be launching in Canada and also in Australia later this year, and possibly in a couple of other countries as well. The other downside of the Ancestry DNA test is that they don't offer the same tools that we get with the other two companies, and in particular the ability to use what we call a chromosome browser, which I'll show you shortly, and also you don't get the underlying data for the matching segments, which is very useful for verifying the relationships. There is a very detailed chart in the ISOGG Wiki, an autosomal DNA testing comparison chart, and it's worth checking that out, where you can see all the different features compared. So what is autosomal DNA? Well, we all have 22 pairs of autosomes, and we also have 1 pair of sex chromosomes. And as we saw earlier, if you're a female you have 2 X's, and if you're a male you have an X and a Y chromosome. Now the Y chromosome, as we saw, is passed on unchanged from father to son. The important feature about the autosomes is that before they get passed on to you, they are shuffled up in a process, a random process called recombination. So you effectively get in each chromosome is a patchwork of the DNA that you inherit a patchwork of DNA from all 4 of your grandparents. And it's a very random process, so sometimes you will end up with big segments from one ancestor, from say one grandparent, and smaller segments from another grandparent, and you get this wonderful mosaic pattern here. There's a very useful page in the ISOGG Wiki on autosomal DNA statistics. It's worth having a look at this page. Just to give you the background, we share 50% of our DNA with our parents and with our siblings. We share 25% of our DNA with our grandparents, and then as we go back through the generations, the amount of DNA that is shared, rapidly decreases. So once you get out to the 4th and 5th and 6th cousin level, we only share a very tiny percentage of DNA with our 5th and 6th cousins. And because the inheritance process is so random, you will find that once you get out to 5th and 6th cousins, you won't match all of your 5th and 6th cousins. But the other side of the coin is that we have many, many more 5th and 6th and distant cousins, so those will actually comprise the majority of the matches in your match list. If you are looking to take an autosomal DNA test to prove a particular relationship, you need to bear in mind the chances of actually having a match with one of your cousins. If you take a test and compare results with a second cousin, then it's supposed to be 99% of the time you will share enough DNA in common to show up as a match. I don't think we've had any cases yet where second cousins have not shown up as a bona fide match. Once you get out to third cousins, only about 90% of third cousins will show up as a match, and only about 50% of fourth cousins, and then the odds diminish as we go further and further back in time. Now, although the autosomal DNA tests only have a much narrower reach, this is my family tree going back for those 5 or 6 generations, and I'm sure that I'm not alone in struggling to fill all those particular gaps in my family tree. What I'm hoping is that eventually I will get autosomal DNA matches that will help me to solve some of these mysteries in my family tree. I have a great-grandfather who I've not been able to trace. He was supposedly born in London, but I can find no birth registration, and the father is not there on any of the censuses. So I've got a very, very big gap in my family tree there, and various other places where I've not been able to find the answers. When you get your results through, this is the match page that you will get, and what you get, I've had to obscure the names here obviously for privacy reasons, but you will be given the names of your matches, and then you can contact your matches by email, and if they've filled in the family tree where you've got those little green symbols, if you click on that, that will open up a family tree. You can enter the ancestral surnames that you're researching, and then if a surname shows up in your match list and in the list of your matches, then those surnames are highlighted in bold. The number of matches that people are getting is probably, most British people are getting something at Family Tree DNA, they're getting probably between about 300 and 600 matches. There are a few people who get slightly more than that, and some who get a little bit less than that. But that number will go up over time as more and more people test. At Ancestry DNA, you end up with lots and lots of matches, but a few of those matches that you can actually do anything with, because so many of the people are in America. But again, that will change as more British people start to test with Ancestry. Now, what you're hoping for is a situation I had here. This is my dad's matching page, and you can see here that he matches me, fortunately, and it shows that I'm his daughter, and he also had a match with his grandson. But we had a match here with the surname Cruse, which is my dad's surname. And in this particular case, this was actually very, very helpful, because it confirmed a relationship that we hadn't been able to prove through the paper records. And here the match, all his ancestry was from Canada, and so we could be fairly confident that the only place where they did share the family tree was through this Cruse surname. What we actually had, I have a great grandfather, Thomas Cruse, who was born in Devon, who had a brother by the name of William George Cruse, and William disappeared from the UK records sometime after the 1841 census. And I did find a likely candidate in Prince Edward Island, Canada, and we had the naming patterns of the children corresponded with the naming patterns in Devon. And I found a marriage for a William Cruse to a Sarah Burrows. When I got the marriage certificate, unfortunately, it only gave the name of the married couple. It didn't give the names of the parents. So I was unable to find anything in the Canadian records that could actually confirm that the William Cruse who was in Prince Edward Island, Canada, was the same one who was born in Burrington in Devon. But the fact that we had this DNA match and the relationships were exactly what we would expect if the tree was as we predicted was very, very strong evidence in support of our theory that we'd found the right candidate. One of the nice features about the Family Finder test with Family Tree DNA, you can actually look at this chromosome browser view and you can see which particular segments of DNA you share in common with your matches. So this is a comparison with my dad's Canadian cousin on the left, and you can see those orange blocks there. Those are the blocks of DNA that they share in common. So they've got 3 big segments of DNA that they share, and that is the proof of their relationship. And I've also compared myself with our Canadian cousin, and you can see that I only have 1 block of DNA in common with my cousin. So you can see how random the inheritance process is and how quickly we begin to lose the DNA, and then perhaps within a few generations that particular block of Cruse DNA may actually just disappear completely from future generations. Sometimes DNA can solve long-standing mysteries. This is a case that was reported in the UK press last summer. Michelle Rooney was known as the Dustbin Baby. She was literally thrown out with the rubbish and found in a carrier bag outside a block of flats on a very, very cold winter's evening, and rescued just in time before the dustbin men came around. She took a DNA test with Family Tree DNA and had a match with a first cousin in the database. And the first cousin was then able to look at her family tree, and she found one of her uncles who seemed to be in the right place at the right time and who was potentially a candidate to be Michelle's father. So the uncle was tested as well, and then when the results came through, they were a parent-child match. So that's the sort of scenario which really only DNA can solve. It would be almost impossible to solve from any other records unless the parents came forward. Sadly, the father was not able to tell Michelle the name of her mother. He just couldn't remember, but she's still trying to search for her mother, and perhaps one day, as more people test, that she will get an answer. So that's another aspect, that even if your DNA results don't help you, it may be that your results will help someone else. The final part of the autosomal DNA test is the ethnicity results, or admixture results. These are my results from family tree DNA, and you can see I've got 100% European, and then they try and break it down into different subgroups, and I'm supposedly 57% from the British Isles. What you find with these admixture tests, depending on which company you test with, you end up with sometimes quite drastically different results from each different company. So these tests really should be taken with a very large pinch of salt at the moment. They don't really give you much in the way of meaningful information. They are useful at the continental level. If you get certain percentages of, say, Asian DNA or African DNA, then that does actually mean something. And also Ashkenazi Jewish DNA can be picked up fairly reliably with these tests, because Ashkenazi Jews were an isolated population for several hundred years, so that DNA has become concentrated. But mostly when they give you, if they give you countries in here, it doesn't mean that you should start going off and looking for ancestors who live in those countries. It just means it's just a limitation of the methodology at the moment. These tests should become more accurate perhaps in the years to come, but they may never give us very reliable answers, because all the European countries they were genetically very, very closely related, so it's not very easy to distinguish between, say, French DNA and British DNA. But once you've done these tests, the results do get adjusted. We're actually on the second incarnation of these results with all of the three different companies, and I'm sure we'll see many more changes in the years to come. A quick word about resources. ISOGG, the International Society of Genetic Genealogy, is the main resource for information and education on the subject of genetic genealogy. They have a wiki where you can find lots of useful information, and also a very active Facebook group. And there's also a variety of mailing lists and other specialist Facebook groups, and you can find all those links in the ISOGG Wiki. And the other source of useful information are the various genetic genealogy blogs, and again there's a list in the wiki of those. It's a very fast changing field, so you really need to be on a mailing list or in a group to try and keep up with all the changes, and also to compare notes with other people and to understand all the changes that are being made. And just a quick note about the two books that I've written. I've got a book on DNA and social networking, which covers in the first half of the book, it looks at the three different types of DNA test. And my more recent book is the Surnames Handbook, and that has a whole chapter on surnames and DNA projects. And just to sum up, we've been looking at the three different types of DNA test. The Y-DNA test is the test that follows the surname line, the father's 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 line. The mitochondrial DNA test is the test that tracks the mother's line. Autosomal DNA is the test that will give you matches with your genetic cousins on all your different family lines. Make sure you test people while you still have the chance. Any DNA test is best used for examining a particular hypothesis, but it can be fun to go on what we call a fishing trip, and if you do that, you will never know what you might catch.